Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever struggled with fear in your life, then do we have the Unafraid show for you. Today I'll be talking with Reverend Adam Hamilton, the senior pastor of the 20,000-member Church of the Resurrection and the best-selling author of 25 books, including his latest, A Stunningly Beautiful Look at Fear, Unafraid. And that's just what I want to talk with him about how to live with courage and hope in our uncertain times. That, plus we'll talk about preaching and boxers, Maybell charging, gotcha, Daniel and skydiving, hand trowels and electric sockets, oh no, the importance of henny penny, prom dresses in the Salvation Army, the power of a thunder shirt, and what in the world apple munchies and the Grand Canyon has to do with anything.
Oh, man, you've got it all in here. This is great.
Woohoo! So welcome to the show, Adam. Are you ready to shine?
I am, Michael. Hey, it's great to be with you and with your viewers as well. Thank you so much for having me on the program today.
And thank you so much for joining us here today. So before we dive right into things, if we go back to your earliest years, did you grow up unafraid?
You know, as a kid, I had fears. I think every child does. You know, I remember as a little one, I had this fear of a monster that lived under my bed. Mm-hmm. I called him the bubble monster. I don't know why, bubblehead or something. And I remember being terrified. My earliest memories were being really scared, and my mom bringing a nightlight into the room, and somehow that made it okay. And then later on, being afraid to go to the basement. We had one of these huge the gas furnaces where the air just rises up. I can't remember what they call it, but it wasn't a forced air furnace. And it looked like it had huge tentacles, in this basement. This was an old home, and you went down to the basement. That's where the laundry was. And I was always scared when I was a kid to go down there. So I think I had my fair share of fears when I was little.
And then you had, I'm almost afraid to ask, you did have a hand trowel and electric socket, and that taught you a fear or two.
Yeah, exactly. So in part of the book, I share the story of as a kid, I was probably, 8 or 9 years old. And I watched my parents plug things into electrical sockets. And I was curious. And I thought, I wonder what actually happens when you do that. So I decided to have a little experiment. And I got at a hand trowel that my grandmother had given me. It had a sharp, pointy end. And the house was an ungrounded house, the electrical outlet. So, I plugged, I pushed one part of that into the socket, and instantly there was a snap, and there was smoke that came out of the outlet and black char around it. The lights went out, and I was kind of thrown backwards. Fortunately, it had a rubber handle on it. It scared the daylights out of me. Pretty soon, my dad comes running in. What the hell did you do? And I'm like, I don't know, which was true. I didn't know what I did. Well, what did you put in the socket? And I said, nothing, which was, of course, not true. And he finally found it. I tossed it in my, toy box.
Hide the crime.
Yeah, exactly. And then he let me have it. And I'll tell you, he let me have it because he cared about me. He didn't want me to get hurt. Mm-hmm. I learned from that experience. I was so scared from that to this day, I'm really cautious around electricity. There's something about fear where, fear's a gift when it's rightly utilized. It's a gift, and it's meant to help us not do things that are dangerous. And so that fear has kept me cautious about electricity ever since.
Tyco train set. That was mine. The transformer for it. I'm plugging it in, plugging it out, watching the trains going till I caught my finger in between it, I guess. And threw me back, and the whole body buzzed. And I learned a very respectful lesson. So if we go back, maybe it was a year or two before that, this was a big challenge that I had in my life. I had got locked in a locker, not a chain link fence. Can you tell us about the bullies and Bruce? Yeah,
sure. So we had lived in a neighborhood where I had lots of kids, but almost all of them were older than me. And so there was a couple of them that just loved picking on the younger kids. And they took me one day and they tied me up to a fence, a chain link fence in somebody else's backyard, another neighbor's backyard. And I couldn't get free. And there I am for, it seemed like hours. I'm sure it was, less than an hour, but it seemed like hours before somebody finally found me and set me free. Anyway, so this kind of picking on and teasing was a regular part of being a kid in my neighborhood. But there was an older kid named Bruce. So his younger brother, Brian, was one of those who was picking on me, and a couple others, and today we would look at it and, it wouldn't seem like that big of a deal. But when you're 7, 8, 9 years old, it's a much bigger deal. And I remember one day Bruce came up, and he came to Brian and Chad, who were two of my neighbors. And he said, if you guys are going to pick on him, you're going to have to pick on me. Now, Bruce was 2 years older than they were. And so, I had this guy who was a foot taller than these two guys who were bullying me. And you know what? I was never afraid again because I had Bruce in my corner. It's amazing what happens. Exactly. And that kind of becomes a metaphor in this book about, thinking about God and the idea of somebody stronger and bigger than you are that comes alongside you, that helps you not be afraid when you know that person, in the case of Bruce, was walking with me, or even if there was the threat of him coming alongside me. It changed the dynamics of my fear in that relationship.
It makes me think of the Jim Carrey movie, Bruce Almighty. You had Bruce Almighty by your side.
I did.
So how long, at what age did you start wanting to become a preacher or go down this path? And were your parents spiritual?
Yeah. So I was baptized Catholic. My dad was Catholic growing up. My mother was Church of Christ. And in 1964, when I was born, these were two sort of opposites, like oil and water, And so really, they solved the religion dilemma by us not going to church after I was baptized. We didn't go much. Went as a child occasionally with my grandmother. And she was the first one who really, she shared faith with me, gave me a Bible, taught me to pray the rosary, these kind of things. It wasn't until my folks got divorced and I'd gotten involved in drugs and some other things. I was 14 years old when a man came door to door inviting people to church, and he invited me to church. And I decided, I don't know why, I thought, oh, sure, I'll go. At the time, I thought I was an agnostic, and I thought, I don't know, there's something tells me I should go. This man, his vocal cords had been removed, and he spoke with what looked like a microphone pressed to his throat. He had an electrolarynx. And something about the fact that he would go door to door inviting people to church despite his disability moved me. And so I went to church. I didn't believe in God, but I believed in girls, and there were 3 really cute girls in the front row of the church, and I decided to go back. Exactly. And so started going to church and began reading the Bible. I thought everybody should read the Bible. I loved Greek mythology. I thought, this is just Hebrew mythology. I should read it. So I started reading it, and somewhere along the way it had several experiences in which I felt God's presence. I felt love, and I continued reading the scriptures. I began to read the Gospels, and the preacher was talking about Jesus all the time, and I thought, I need to find out more about this guy. And I went to the pastor. I was halfway through the Old Testament. I was halfway through the book of Psalms, actually. And I went to him and I said, look, I've been reading this book for months. I'm in the book of Psalms. I can't find Jesus anywhere in here. You keep talking about him. Where is he? He said, well, the P is silent. It's Psalms. You got to go to the Gospels. So I started reading the Gospels, and I was really taken with Jesus. I was taken with the way he stood up to the religious hypocrites. I was taken with the way he cared about the marginalized and the nobodies. I got to the Gospel of Luke, and when I finished reading the Gospel of Luke, I got down on my knees next to my bed. I was 14, and I just said, okay, Jesus, this is like 11 o'clock at night. I just, I was going to sleep, and I said, I've read this story, and I would like to follow you. And I know I'm just a kid. I'm just 14 years old. If there's anything you can do with me, I hope you will. But I'd like to offer who I am and my life to you. And that was a change in trajectory for the rest of my life. I was 16 when I felt called to be a pastor, though. My church kept telling me, the little old ladies in the church, oh, you used to be a pastor. You have the gifts to be a pastor. I'm like, I don't want to be a pastor. I want to be a lawyer, a doctor, or something else, but not a pastor. And my pastor asked me to preach one Sunday night for the youth service. It was church, but it was going to be youth Sunday. And so I thought, well, how hard can that be? It looks pretty easy. And I preached what was the worst sermon ever given in that church. I learned how hard it is to actually do this. But when I was done, something deep inside said, this is what you were made for. And so from the time I was 16, I felt, that this was what I was supposed to do, to be a pastor.
How did you step forward into that fear to give the quote unquote worst, which turns out it was the best speech ever, because it actually helped you to step forward and through that fear? Right.
It was funny. I don't know that I can really recount exactly what happened, but I just remember feeling when I went to stand up to give the message, I had this thing mapped out on a few pieces of paper, and I realized before I got up, this is really bad. This is not going to be any good. And I think this is everyone's fear of public speaking. When you talk about the number 1 or number 2 fears for most people, it's public speaking ranks right up there, is the fear of public humiliation. Like I was standing in front of 150 people who I knew and loved and who knew and loved me. And what I was about to share was just not good. And so you feel that like, oh, and it's even worse because you feel like I'm speaking on behalf of God. Like I'm supposed to be offering people something inspiring and helpful. And what I offered was not very good. I have an audio cassette tape of it, and no one will ever hear it. But what, somehow the sense I had was afterwards, it was almost like God was saying, okay, this is not as easy as you thought it was. And this can work if you let me work through you. And a reassurance that it's going to be okay. You'll get better at this, but this is what I want you to do. I feel that same anxiety every week before I get up to preach. I preach 5 services a weekend. I've been doing this for 30 years now, and I still feel anxious before I get up to preach. And then somewhere in there, through prayer, I kind of settle in. I trust that God is going to somehow work despite me. And my prayer every week is, before I lead worship, is, God, help me to disappear. These people might see and hear from you and not from me. And there are moments where you just feel like, okay, God just did something and I got to be a part of it. And it's part of why I keep coming back every week.
Woohoo! Between you and me, I'm afraid before each show, and this is show like 820 something, and I do live shows weekly as well, twice a week live shows, and I do a morning 3 to 5 minute show every single day, and I'm still afraid. And I go to prayer every single time. If I step back and get out of myself, my assumption, and it's worked so far, is that I can't go too wrong.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think when we invite God to be a part of that, when we offer our best and we're prepared, and you've come prepared for this interview, better prepared than any of the other interviews I've done. So thank you.
Woohoo! So we're going to fast forward from 16 doing a prayer service to the second commencement address, or second commencement for Obama for the National Prayer Service. And was there any fear then?
Yeah. So I was sitting at home one day. I was working my sermon in my study, and my assistant called and said, the White House just called, wants you to do the, preach for the president, the National Prayer Service, which is always the first thing that happens on the first day in office. And at first I thought, oh, come on, this is a joke. And like, no, they really want you to come do this. So I prepared this sermon, and I remember I was on vacation that week, but I prepared the sermon, and I went and I preached it. We were at the beach, and I preached it probably 18 times to the waves, just trying. I'm like, you're going to stand for 15 minutes in front of the President of the United States, the Vice President, members of Congress, the Supreme Court, some of the Supreme Court justices. And then I remember when I got to the National Cathedral where I was to give this message, and I'm walking up to the pulpit, and there's multiple steps up into this pulpit. It was the pulpit Dr. King preached his last sermon on a Sunday from.
Oh my God.
And this was Dr. King weekend. And I am walking up with my manuscript. My hands are just shaking. And I've been doing this for years. And I just, I set it down. I had this nightmare the night before, of CNN headlines, Kansas City pastor humiliates himself in front of, the president. I carrying the manuscript up there, and I'm imagining it falling off the pulpit down 10 feet to the floor. And I just, okay, God, I'm yours. So use me however you want to. I feel like this message came from you. Please help me to, and just sort of settled in. And after a minute or two, it was actually quite fun. It was really one of the more enjoyable moments of my life to have a chance to try to speak into and offer encouragement to the president and members of his administration.
Woohoo! The prayer that just popped into my head right now is St. Francis's prayer, make me an instrument of thy love.
Yes. Yeah, I pray that prayer and its variations many times. It's a beautiful prayer.
Awesome.
Make me an instrument of your peace where there's, hatred, let me sow love, all of that is just beautiful.
Absolutely. So then I am almost afraid to ask, no pun intended, but a recurring nightmare of preaching in boxers.
Yeah. So, and I think probably every pastor, every preacher's had this nightmare at some point, but the nightmare is it's morning, it's Sunday morning, and I have slept in. The alarm didn't go off, or somehow I didn't realize it was Sunday. The phone rings. They're saying, where are you? Where are you? It's church. And so I get up and I run out the door, try to wet my hair down, run out the door, get to the church. I look in the pulpit. My manuscript's not there. I realize I forgot to prepare a message for that week. I start trying to wing it, and I see people laughing. I look down, and I'm standing there in my boxer shorts and realize I haven't even gotten dressed. And that usually startles me enough to wake me up. But somehow I think it points to that probably that deep fear of public humiliation, embarrassment that is behind our fear of public speaking or, doing the kinds of things you do in interviews.
So, and there's even an element, I think we had on an expert, Amy Cuddy years ago was the first person to talk about it, which is a fear of being an imposter, that people will
Oh,
find
yeah.
out that I'm not the real deal, that I
Yeah.
was just bluffing it this whole time.
Yeah. Well, and that actually, if you think about showing up without your clothes on, that might be, I hadn't thought about that, but that may be more of the fear that you're experiencing is that, yeah, now they're going to see you nearly naked and,
Who you
and see
really
who you are
are.
really, right, who you really are. Yeah.
So naked boxers, who you really are. Were you scared the night before you married Levon?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So Levon and I got married the week after high school graduation, which was about the dumbest thing you can do. But we came from a little church background where they talked about Jesus is coming back at any moment, and so we thought, well, gosh, we want to spend the rest of our lives together. We better get on with it. And so the night before we got married, up to that point, I thought, you kind of think you're more mature than you really are. We're ready for this. We did the rehearsal dinner, or had the rehearsal dinner. I got home and I thought, what are you doing? You're 17 years old. It was a month before my 18th birthday. My dad had to sign for my marriage license. He was in town from Saudi Arabia. He was not going to be back for a few years. So I thought, this is never going to work. My parents were divorced. Her parents have been divorced. We hadn't really seen what this is supposed to look like. And in the midst of that, I have very seldom had panic attacks, but this was one I had that night, and thinking, and then somewhere in there had to be able to go, okay, wait a minute, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? The worst thing that's going to happen is it's not going to work, and you're still going to be okay, and she's still going to be okay, and somehow you'll figure it out. And again, prayer was a key part of that too that night, just to say, okay, God, I thought this is what I was supposed to do, and this is maybe a really stupid decision, but please help us. And I'll tell you, 36 years later, I'm really glad we made that stupid decision. And I'm really glad that we've, stuck with it in times that were hard, because really every marriage is hard at times. There are seasons where you're in love and seasons where you're not in love and seasons that are just hard. And I feel like both Levon and I have consistently said, God, help us to be the people you want us to be, and help us to be the husband or wife you want us to be. And in the process of that, and trying to actually live our vows of loving one another selflessly, somehow the feelings always come back. And so now, it's an interesting thing when you survey people survey people about their fears, you find the older people get, the less fearful they are. And that surprised me, actually. We did a survey of 2,400 people, and I thought that the older folks might be more fearful than the younger ones. Well, the younger ones are more fearful, and the older you get, the more you've lived and the more you realize, the world isn't as scary as I thought it was. And many of the things that I'm afraid will happen don't happen. And even if they do happen, somehow we make it through. And so fear goes down the older that you get. And I think that's where, after 36 years of marriage, when we have those dry spots or those periods where we don't feel in love, we both just know, hey, it's okay. That just happens sometimes. It's going to be all right.
It's a wave. It's not the ocean.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Woohoo! Another big fear you have, if we wind forward, I'm guessing 7, 8, 9 years forward from there, was being assigned to start a church.
Yeah. So in 1990, I had really hoped to do this. I graduated from graduate school from seminary in 1988, was an associate pastor for a couple of years, and I kept telling my superintendent, I said, I'd really like to start a church for thinking people and who don't go to church anywhere. And finally, in February of 1990, the district superintendent called and said, okay, the bishop's willing to send you out to do this, but we have no people, we have no land, we have no money, we have no place for you to meet. We're going to pay your associate pastor salary for a year, and we're going to give you a 20% pay cut after 12 months. So you either find people or you starve. And I had a 2-week-old baby. Well, actually, Lavon was pregnant at the time, and we had a 3-year-old daughter. And I began thinking, what if this doesn't work? And I started having people, wise sages who had been around longer than I had, saying, Adam, it's undercapitalized. There's no way this is going to work. It's going to be a black mark on your career. Don't do it. Don't do it. And you hear that from enough other people, the reasons why you should be afraid and how it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. And I found myself thinking maybe it won't work. And yet inside I felt like I was supposed to do this. I had this nudge, this longing, this sort of fire pent up in my bones that I couldn't shake it. And so up to the very last week, I had a chance to say, no, I don't want to do it. And people were still encouraging me to do that. And I finally just said, if the worst thing happens, I fail at this, and somehow I'll land on my feet again, and I'll start over, and I'll do, I'll pastor some little church somewhere, and somehow that's going to be okay. And I find it's helpful sometimes to ask, so what's the worst thing that's going to happen here? Now, if the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to get hit by a car and killed, and there's a high likelihood of that, well, you probably ought to step back and say, okay, I shouldn't be doing this. But for a lot of things, most of the most important things in my life, the most rewarding and best parts of my life came with a degree of risk and with some fear. And if you give into your fears, then you never experience life. You end up missing out on the best parts of life because you played it safe all the time. And so somewhere in there, and that's part of why I wrote the book, is to help people live, unafraid doesn't mean without fear. It means that I press through my fears. And courage isn't, fearlessness, like you have no fear. Courage is doing the right thing or the thing you feel called to do despite your fear. And that's what I found in my life, is that pressing through the fear has always led to really remarkable experiences. And even when it hasn't, it's been okay.
Woohoo! If we go back to when you started that church, you felt a calling, you stepped forward into that fear. If it hadn't worked out, my guess is you learned something beautiful, brilliant, and that it may take a while to dust yourself off. And I've been there myself, really dust yourself off and then get going. And you would have learned something powerful. Had you not have gone for it, I feel like it probably would have gnawed at your bones.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it would have certainly you would have had this sense my whole life. I would have thought, what would have happened if I'd done that? If I hadn't done it, there would have been that sort of gnawing feeling. And I think you do. I mean, part of what happens in life is our failures are our best teachers, right? I mean, we learn more about life, we learn more character, we learn more. Our spirituality goes deeper in the light of the times when we have failed. And so, failure is not. And I love this. There's a commercial Michael Jordan did some years ago, and in the commercial, he talks about failure and how many times he failed, how many baskets he'd missed, how many times he'd been given the ball, for the game-winning shot, and 23 times. He had the opportunity to make the game-winning shot, and he failed. And he said, in the end, he says, "I succeed because I failed. I was willing to fail again and again and again, and because I failed, I succeeded." And I think that's, if you look at any of the people who've changed the world, they had failure after failure, but they didn't give up in the midst of it. And that's that's one of the laws of leadership I teach across the country, is just this. The importance of perseverance, that we don't give up in the face of failure, because you're going to have that sometimes. And so you learn from it, you grow from it, you pick yourself up, as you said, dust yourself off, and you go at it again.
Woohoo! If you don't mind me asking, it was part of an inspiration behind you writing this book. Do you mind if I ask about your wife's fears and how you learned from these experiences?
No, sure. That's great. So it was, I'm trying to remember, 17 or 18 years ago, we were coming home from a meeting, and Levon began to, her breathing got shallow. Her heart started beating, like it was beating out of her chest. She thought she was having a heart attack, some kind of heart incident. We took her to the emergency room, and they couldn't find anything. It happened again, and we were back in the emergency room multiple times, back in the emergency room, things happening that were really scary. I mean, physiologically, very scary. And in the end, they did find there were some small blood clots in her lungs. And so, you look for a diagnosis, you go, okay, maybe that's it. And so began to treat that. But after spending a lot more time talking with people who've been through incidents like this, I think Levon became convinced, she is convinced, that a major part of what was happening was really anxiety. It was anxiety disorder. It was panic attacks she was having that left her fearful of being in crowds, her palms getting sweaty, her heart beating rapidly, her breathing shallow. All of these are physiological things that are triggered by the amygdala in the brain. And so these are fear responses that in the right circumstances are meant to help us fight or flee or freeze. But when your alarm system is going off, which is what the amygdala is, it's taking taking information from your various sensors, internal and external. Mm-hmm. And when it goes off, when there's not really a danger, then it begins to feel like, well, okay, I'm not afraid of anything. There's no, imminent threat. There must be something wrong with my brain or my body. There must be something really wrong. And then when the doctors can't figure out what it is, it makes it even worse. It's like, man, it must be something really bad if the doctors can't figure out what it is. And it's debilitating. And about 16% of the U.S. population struggles with panic attacks and anxiety disorders. And so it was a several-year process of walking through that and learning. And she had people she talked to who'd been through that journey. It was hard for her to imagine that it was actually anxiety to begin with. And in fact, when we talk about it, she'd get angry because it's like, no, that's not it. I don't feel anxious. It just didn't feel like there was. And then eventually coming to this place where she was able to say, okay, I think maybe that is it. And then, medication helped. Journaling helped. And in the book, she actually writes a portion of one of the chapters where she describes her story. And there's a video that goes with the book for small groups to use, book clubs, Bible studies, those kind of things, Sunday school classes. And I have five segments, 15-minute segments, and I interview experts, a neuroscientist from Vanderbilt, a Fortune 500, Fortune 100 CEO. But one of the interviews is with Levon, and I just have her tell her story because I think it's helpful for people who struggle with anxiety and panic to hear from somebody else and to realize, you know what, I'm okay. This happens sometimes. And I liken it to when your smoke alarms in your house go off when there's no fire. Sometimes those sensors get dust on them. Sometimes, and that's what's happening with the amygdala. Something's triggering that. It's nothing wrong with you. You're not going crazy. It is it's something that's happening that can be treated. And, Levon, she always will wrestle with a small level of that anxiety, but she is not the same person she was 17 years ago when we were walking through this. And I look at her, I dedicated the book to her because she, to me, is one of the most courageous people that I've ever met.
Woohoo! So if you don't mind me asking, it's like asking a carpenter about their hammer. We have a recent program we've released on journaling, what we call automatic writing, of connecting with our inner source, guide, God, however we want to call it, through a journaling technique. How did journaling help her, and what's she done?
Well, I wish she was here to talk about this directly, but I think what really helped was when she would journal, she was able to put down her feelings on paper, which is something about just getting them down. And to be honest, she's not trying to explain something to me, and I don't really fully understand because I'm not going through it. She's writing these things down, articulating what she's feeling. But it also, and often our journals become a form of prayer as well, at least for me when I'm journaling. And I think she does the same thing. When you're writing these things down, it's sort of like laying these things before God. And so she's doing that, but it also helped her to look back a month, 2 months back and to see, oh, I've made progress. Because when you're going through it, you don't feel like you're making progress. You feel like you're just as bad today as you were 3 months ago. But she could look back 3 months ago and see how much more fearful she was than she was then. And so it helped her feel like I'm making progress. I can see that there's, that I'm moving forward in the right direction. It might be 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but the general direction is forward.
Woohoo! So let's talk about, from moving forward, let's go to George Michael and You Gotta Have Faith. And what's the faith that he's speaking about?
Mm-hmm. So many of your listeners will remember that song. It was, sold millions and millions of copies, but he wasn't talking about religious faith, though he had a cross on when he was, on the album cover. But he was talking about a bias of hope. He was talking about, in that case, he had been jilted and he was afraid he would never find somebody to love him again. And then somebody came along and wanted to go out with him, but this wasn't really the person he wanted to go out with. But in his mind, he's thinking, well, maybe nobody else will want me. Maybe I need to go out with this person. And then he realized you got to have faith. You got to have faith that somehow there's going to be the right person out there. I got to have faith that this is not the end of my story and nobody's ever going to love me again. And so that kind of faith, it's one of 4 steps I outline in the book for how we, traditional and classic ways of dealing with our fears. And when we think of that kind of faith, this bias of hope says, look, probably things are going to work out. Most things are not as scary as they seem. It's recognizing that a lot of fear is false events appearing real. That's the old acronym we know. I liken it to the mirror on the side of our car, and it's the rear, the passenger side mirror. It has a little note on it that says objects in the mirror are closer than they appear, because the mirror is in a concave shape or convex. I never can remember which, but in our minds it's just the opposite. Objects that are further away appear closer than they really are. And so if you can remind yourself of that, if you have a chance to remember, okay, I'm just not going to be as afraid of, I'm going to trust that somehow things usually work out. And that's the thing, the older you get, the more you realize that really is how it works. I've been with, we have a large congregation. I've been with so many people who are walking through things they thought, I don't see how I can make it through this. And they always do. I've been with people who've lost children, and you think and that's the worst. It's the worst thing. And they also make it through. And so you see how people make it through hell. And eventually you come to go, I think that's how it's going to work. I'm going to choose. And here's the thing. We choose at a subconscious level, and sometimes at a conscious level, we choose to either live in despair or to live with a sense of hope that somehow I'm going to make it through this. It takes as much energy to choose to live with despair as to live with hope. So some of what we have to do is we have to remind ourselves of this. Some of it's self-talk. Some of it's when we start having the self-talk of, how horrible it's going to be, or I'm not going to make it through, to be able to go, yeah, you are. You're going to make it through. And this is where spiritual disciplines come in as well. Breathing, mindfulness, prayer, a number of other things I outline in the book to help us be able to convince our brain it is going to be okay. And often it's friends who help us do that as well. It's, there's a whole host of ways we do it, but that bias of hope, I think, is really important.
Woohoo! And one of the things you talk about is it's not important enough just to have faith. We have to then step forward.
Yeah, exactly. So this acronym I have for fear that's a positive, the sort of steps, one is this idea of focusing or facing our fears with a bias of hope. The second, which we'll come back to, is examining your assumptions in the light of the facts. Mm-hmm. The third is attacking your anxiety with action. And then the last is releasing your fears to God. So this attacking your anxiety with action, fear is meant to elicit a response. So when we don't respond to our fears, when we just try to bury them, we try to just not think about them or avoid them, we're not doing what fear was meant to do. Fear was meant to move us to action. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the fears we face, the sort of existential fears, are much simpler than life-threatening things. They're a fear about growing old, or they're a fear about not having enough money, or they're a fear about those kinds of things. In fact, in a second, I'll share with you the top 5 fears that we saw in our survey of younger adults, older adults. But so if you're afraid of not having enough money when you retire, which was the second most frequent fear for those over 50, you can just keep noodling on that forever, or you can say, I'm going to take some steps to actually address that fear. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, when you take steps, just basic steps to address your anxieties, the anxieties begin to go down, because anxiety is waiting for you to take action. If you take no action, you're just allowing it to stay, and you continue to mull it over, and in your heart, it just continues to grow. Taking action makes the thing smaller, and it gives you a plan of attack. And so that's a huge part of dealing with our anxieties. And it has been throughout history. People have found if you lean into your fears and you face them and you attack them, you start taking action, they dissipate. And I love this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt I have in the book. She says, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You're able to say to yourself, I lived through this horror, I can take the next thing that comes along," which captures both this idea of the bias of hope, but also attacking your fear. It's walking towards it instead of, or sometimes it's running away. If you're on the edge of a cliff, you're meant to be terrified by that. You're meant to get away from the cliff. But fear is meant to motivate you to action in some way.
Woohoo! I love to say fear and anxiety are energy without deliberate motion or deliberate action, meaning when you step forward deliberately, it has to be in that intended direction. You can walk all you want. It might make you feel better for the moment, but if it's not facing the fear, the fear will still be there.
That's right.
What are the top 5 then? I'm very curious. What are the top 5 fears?
Sure. So first of all, I might mention that, fear is ubiquitous. As human beings, we are all to some degree fearful, and we're meant to have some measure of fear. Fear saves us. It's what protects the human species. It's what helps us to live. But we're not meant to be, living in a chronic state of fear, and we're not meant to be fearful of things we don't have to be fearful of. So anyway, 88% of people 18 to 35 reported either moderate or significant levels of fear, 45% significant levels, which means that there are seasons during the year where they feel debilitated by their fear or paralyzed by it. And that gets even a little worse for the 36 to 50-year-olds. They're 89% of them. So instead of 88, 89%. But the significant fear drops just a little bit when you're from 36 to 50. Those who are 51 to 65, it drops pretty significantly. It's 77%, but only 31% with significant fear. By the time you get to 75, only 21% of those who are 75 and older have significant levels of fear. So it's less than half of those who are young adults. But the things we found so we had 2,400 people who took the survey. Yeah. And what we found is those who were over 50 had a different set of fears than those who were under 50. So under 50, the top 5 fears, number 1 was personal failure. Mm-hmm. So those under 50, this anxiety about what if I fail? What happens? The second is disappointing other people. The third was uncertainty about the future. The fourth was financial difficulties. And the fifth was the death of a loved one. For those over 50, the number 1 fear was the direction of our country. Now, we took the survey in 2016 in the middle of a presidential election season, and that's just heightened when the candidates are trying to literally scare the hell out of us and get us to vote for them as opposed to the other person, because the world's going to fall apart if the other person gets elected. And that's true at state level, Congress, and for the presidency. And what's interesting about the fear of the direction of the country is it has a lot to do with who's party is in office. So in 2016, Republicans were more fearful than Democrats because we had a Democratic president, and it looked like a Democrat was going to be elected to the next presidential term. Since President Trump was elected, Democratic fears have shot way up and Republican fears have come down. And so a lot of how you feel about the direction of our country has to do with how you feel about the policies of the person who's who's in charge. But in addition to the fear of the direction of the country, there was number two was fear of finances, having adequate finances for retirement. Number three was fear of aging. The fourth was fear of losing my memory, mental capacity. And the fifth was becoming dependent upon other people. And so you can see why those over 50 would be more fearful of those things, whereas those under 50 would be fearful of the others.
What has been, if I get his name right, Lester Reed's secret?
Yeah. So Lester Reed is 108 years old.
Woo-hoo!
And up until last year, he was still walking 2 miles a day. I've asked him his secret, and I don't know that I think everyone that I've met who's over 100 will tell me that part of it is having an optimistic spirit. It's that bias of hope.
Yeah.
And so, worry and fear has a way of taking its toll on our hearts and on our minds, on our physiology. And so that's a part of it. I think he would talk about his faith, and he'd talk about exercising. But I think a large part of it had to do with his attitude. And he would also say it's genes. Not everybody can live to be 108, even if you're positive. But he's a pretty remarkable guy, and he's still, firing away. He told me last year, he said, the one thing I don't do is I don't buy green bananas at my age. So I'm going to make sure I live every day, because I don't know if I'm going to be here tomorrow.
Woohoo! So let's go from there and let's talk about some of the, I don't know if we call it fears or concerns, things that we get to work on that can really help us. First off, chapter 11, you're talking about meaninglessness, and maybe you can tell us either about Viktor Frankl or the upside down way of Jesus.
Yeah, so Viktor Frankl was a prisoner in the concentration camps in Germany. He was a psychotherapist. Before the war, he had worked in the area of suicide and was a part of a project that was aimed at curbing suicide in his country. He was Jewish. His family was most of his family was killed in the concentration camps. And after the war, he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and it captured the insights that he gained both by working with those who were suicidal before the war and then especially in the concentration camps. And what he noted was that people who lost their sense of meaning in life in the camps were, in most cases, likely to die, not just from the circumstances, because the circumstances were horrible, but when they'd given up meaning, they'd given up hope. They'd given up any sense that there was anything good that could come from this, a sense of purposeness for their lives. And so he developed a whole school of psychotherapy called logotherapy. And logos is a Greek word that can mean several things. It can mean just word, but it can also have to do with our sense of purpose or meaning in life. And his therapeutic method was to say, if I can help people rediscover a why to their lives, or if I can help them find meaning from the suffering they've walked through, that actually gives them a sense of resilience. It gives them a sense of hope. It gives them a feeling of there's a reason to keep going on. And so that chapter really focuses on this idea. For many people, there's a struggle. And I think it's true across the board. I think maybe the older we get, I don't know if even with my senior adults here at the church who are in a care center or in a place where they're, not able to get out, those who wake up and feel like I've got a reason for living, I've got something to do, find more joy in their life. They find a greater lightness in their step. They find there's a reason to keep going. So I think about Clara Lockton as one of those folks that she's passed a number of years ago now, but I used to visit her at the nursing home, or what we used to call nursing homes, and Villa St. Joseph. And, here she is surrounded by people, some of whom have lost their memories, some of whom are, but she got up every day and she was like, you know what, these people need me here. And so she saw her mission as caring for the other people and caring for the nurses who walked in the door. Or I think about Mimi Butler was one of our members who died of brain cancer some years ago. But I remember one of the last times I saw her in the hospital, she had her mother prepare these, and she was a young woman, in her 40s at the time. And she had her mother prepare, like lotions and creams for the nurses. And she'd had these sacks beautifully wrapped with bows on them. And every nurse who came in that was a new nurse she hadn't met, she said, I want to give you a gift for taking care of me. And she came to see, she knew she was dying, but she came to believe that while I still have breath, I can bless these nurses who are here because they probably have a tough time doing this. And it's a hard job. Maybe I could lighten their day. And, there was something about that was so beautiful. And it gave her a reason. It gave her a purpose to her suffering. She didn't believe that God made her sick and gave her a brain tumor. She believed, though, this is what I have. And as I have it, I can still be used to bless other people. And that, that helped take away her fear of meaninglessness, but it even addressed her fear of death, because she felt like, I've got a purpose every day. I'm going to bless other people as long as I have breath. It was a beautiful thing to watch and see.
Woohoo! And it leads to another thing, which is a feeling of being alone and unloved, because now she's got relationships. And if you've got that, you've got a heck of a lot.
Right. It's interesting how many people have this fear of being alone and unloved. And, even if we have friends, there are times we feel friendless. There are times where our friends disappoint us, or where it feels like they don't really care. I think for many people, and I was struck by Albert Einstein talking about his loneliness, that he was like one of the most famous people in the world at the time, and yet he still had this fear of being alone, or fear of being lonely, and so part of what happens with that, and often we end up isolating ourselves. So it's not uncommon to find people isolating in you go through a divorce or illness or whatever else, you tend to isolate, and that's the exact opposite of what we need to do. This is again attacking our anxiety with action. Is when you actually step into, okay, that means I have to get out there and I have to meet people. I have to put myself out there and volunteering somewhere, or doing something. Maybe I'm going to visit people in the nursing home just so I can be around other human beings, and my visiting them helps me feel connected.
Huge.
But yeah, we all need that. Even those of us who are introverts need some human interaction, some human connection. And so, there's a whole project in Great Britain that was focused on loneliness. They were recognizing that loneliness, that the social isolation can be as detrimental to your health as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And what we're finding today is, because of social media and our smartphones, we tend to have less social interaction than before. I mean, young adults are having premarital sex less than they used to. And as a pastor, I'm like, oh, that's great, but then I want to know why. And then I find out it's because they're not actually spending time with each other anymore. They're actually looking at their phones. Now that has some positive social benefits too, but it is I say in the book, when somebody is really bummed out or having a tough day, sending them a sad-faced emoji is not the same thing as hugging them. There's something about physical touch and hugging and looking somebody in the eyes and holding their hands and saying, look, I'm here with you. We're going to make it through this. That's different than sending them a text. And so we've sort of lost some of that, and the need for interaction with other human beings is important. That's where, I feel like faith communities can play a key role. Almost every study has shown that people who are involved in faith communities, regardless of the faith community, people who are involved in faith communities have a higher quality of life as they get older. They tend to live longer. They're healthier because they have other people who are caring for them. They're not doing this by themselves.
Well, you feel like somebody has your back.
Right. And you also feel needed because somebody needs your support and your care for them.
Woohoo! So since we went to social media, real briefly, tell us about FOMO. You can even go into FOMO for yourself and writing versus going to the beach. And how do we move past that?
Yeah. So FOMO, as some of you know, is fear of missing out. And this was coined by a writer in a Harvard newspaper several years back. And it is something, I hadn't heard of it until I started researching the book, but every young adult I talked to had heard of FOMO. But I know the feeling, this fear of missing out, which is what's behind a lot of our social struggles. It's our envy of other people. We imagine the life that they have and how great it must be. And unfortunately, social media plays a really key role in this, because you're watching other people's Facebook posts and they look so happy and they're doing so many cool things. And sometimes they didn't invite you and your life seems pretty bland and boring compared to theirs. And so you think, gosh, I'm missing out on so much. And I tell the story in the book. There was a couple I was with one day, and they were, Lana and I spent the day with them and several other couples, and they were fighting the whole day. I mean, they were at each other's throat. You could tell they were bickering and unhappy. But somebody took a picture of them, and they sat up and they smiled and they leaned in and they looked like they were madly in love with each other. It's a beautiful backdrop. We were all on vacation together, and they posted that evening. They posted on Facebook and on Twitter, and I saw this and I'm like, are you kidding me? You guys were miserable all day. You hated each other, and look how happy you look. And we're on vacation here in this great place, and none of their friends knew that they were on the verge of divorce that day. Instead, it just looked like they were having the time of their lives, and that's part of what spurs our FOMO, our fear of missing out, is we see all these wonderful things other people are doing and they look happy all the time, but we never post our unhappy pictures on Facebook. We never post when we look fat or when we look ugly or when we're crying. We're always posting the best parts. But life isn't like that all the time. Life is punctuated by those wonderful mountaintop experiences. And often what's in our pictures is not really what we're feeling at the time. And so to be able to say, yes, there's great experience. I celebrate that my friend got to go on vacation or that they got to do this thing. But, to look at your own life and to be able to go, but I'm really grateful for the life I have and for these good things. And, gratitude plays a really key role too in dealing with our fears is the pausing to say, thank you for the blessings and to count those does play a role in addressing some of our fear of missing out.
Woohoo! What is abiding trust?
Yeah. So abiding trust, and it can mean different things depending on the condition or, who you're talking about or what you're talking about. But this abiding trust is it's a sort of deep down. So when it comes to relationships, it's a deep down trust I have in my wife that, she's got my back, that she's going to be there for me. When it comes to life, it's sort of what we talked about earlier, this sense that somehow things work out okay in the end. Most of the time, and even when they don't, it's okay. But when it comes to God, that abiding trust is, sometimes it's using our imagination to imagine God holding us. I was with somebody who was dying recently, and I told them the story and they were fearful. And I told them the story of my children when they were growing up. When they were little, they used to play this game called Flying Squirrel. And when I'd get home from work, they'd say, Daddy, Daddy, flying squirrel. So I knew what that meant. I'd go to the bottom of the stairs. Yeah. They would climb up 2 stairs and they would throw themselves head first, into my arms, just fling themselves off the step. And we had a hard surface, a ceramic tile surface the entryway. If I hadn't caught them, they would have been really hurt. But they had an abiding trust that their daddy was strong enough to catch him and that he loved them enough that he would really do it. And they would climb up 3 steps and then 4 steps, then 5 steps. And finally at the 6th or 7th step, I'm like, kids, my back is hurting now. I can't do this anymore. But, they would just leap with glee and giggle as they would fly into my arms. And I was telling this person, that's the picture I have of what we do with God, is that we just have this abiding trust that he's going to catch us, that we belong to him. And I want you to imagine him with his arms outstretched, just ready to catch you. And I love, for Christians, we look at the text in the Gospels where Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I do, I'll come back for you. I will come back for you that you might be with me where I am. And in my Father's house, there's room enough to spare. And this idea, I just said, I want you to imagine Jesus reaching out his hand and just taking your hand and that you're safe with him. He's got a hold of you. And, we prayed together. I anointed her head with oil. We prayed together. I sang a hymn for her. And you just see the anxiety going down and just a sense of peace coming over her and her family who was there too. And so, I think that's the kind of abiding trust. And again, when it comes to trust or faith, I think a classic definition of faith is found in the book of Hebrews. It says, faith is the evidence of things hoped for and the substance of things not seen. In other words, faith is using your imagination to imagine these things that you believe are true. And so I think I can imagine that I'm going to die an early death from cancer. I can imagine that I'm going to lose my memories. I can imagine, there's going to be a nuclear war and we're all going to die. I can imagine a million things. Or I can imagine that somehow I belong to one who loves me more than I could possibly imagine or believe. And that one walks with me, even in the valley of the shadow of death. And when that happens, and I imagine that, it takes the same emotional energy to imagine one or the other. I find I fear no evil, trusting that God is with me, his rod and his staff comfort me.
And which one, even without a belief behind it, which one empowers you to step strong in your own 2 feet and to be able to lean into the fear and to step forward?
Right. That's exactly right. Yep.
Woohoo! How do we ask for help? How do we go to pray? How do we turn to God or to whatever we believe in those dark nights of the soul?
Yeah. So I think sometimes we do it when we're not feeling. In fact, the dark night of the soul implies that the way that term was used by the mystics was moments when they didn't feel. They felt God was conspicuous by God's absence. Yeah. Right? They didn't feel God. And that's true for us a lot of the times. We don't necessarily always feel close to God, to the divine. And so in those moments, part of what we do is we continue to pray. We continue to, for me, it's scripture reading. And in the book, I talk about the practice of Lectio Divina, which is a way of reading scripture where you recite it out loud, you repeat it.
And you said slowly.
Multiple times. You focus on, an idea or some concept in that verse. And then you turn that into a prayer. You take that and you begin to pray that. And I'll kind of walk through the steps of that in the appendix. There's 31 scriptures that people can do this with. So I think, when we feel that dark night of the soul is the moment when we are actually most in need of just going through it. You just do it. You just do the things. And I tell people this about marriage. There are seasons you're not going to feel in love, so you practice love until you feel it. You keep doing it, and eventually the feelings come back. And I think this is true when it comes to our spiritual life. There are moments where we don't feel it, and we continue to pray it. We continue to ponder it. We continue to read the scriptures. We continue to trust. And somehow along the way, we find that peace begins to come to us. So I think this is the practice again of mindfulness, of breathing. I know this is important, to stop and to just breathe. There's a process even in that helps us quiet our souls just a little bit, to feel that we're connected with the one who created all things. And so I think it's those kind of processes or practices that we continue to pursue even when we don't feel it, that leads us to once more feel that peace.
Woohoo! I want to, this has been brilliant, Adam. I want to take off my coaching hat and I want to put it on you here, give it to you here for right now. I don't want people leaving this show without a homework assignment to take action on. What one homework assignment would you give people today?
Well, I think it hinges a lot on, first of all, one homework assignment I'd give them is get the book, take a look at it and read what's in there and see how it speaks to them. Because my hope was in writing the book was it would actually literally be a roadmap or a guide for people. There's like 18 different fears we talk about and really walk through that. But in addition to that, I think, so I'm just going to mention again those 4 steps, facing your fears with a bias of hope. That looks like walking towards your fear instead of away from it. And so I'd say that'd be step 1 in your homework assignment is walk towards your fear. Don't walk away from it. And often, therapists talk about this as a process of extinguishing your fears by stepping towards them. Try some little, a little step towards that fear. See that you can conquer that. Take the next step. So that's facing your fears with a bias of hope. The second homework assignment I'd give is to examine your assumptions in the light of the facts. And so what is it that you're afraid of? And then do a little homework about that. One of the top fears for older Americans is losing their memories, losing their mind. And so when you turn 40, you're too young for this, but when you turn 40, you start having, you forget where you put your keys. You see a building, you're driving down the road, like, how long has that building been there? I don't remember that. You forget people's names. Everybody I know over 40 has at some point said, I wonder if I have early onset Alzheimer's. So I did some research. This is examining your assumptions in light of the fact. People can be really anxious about this. So your chance of having early Alzheimer's before the age of 65 is 0.24%. You're 99.76% unlikely to have early onset Alzheimer's. Well, when you do the research of the thing you're fearful of, you find, hey, I don't have to be afraid of this. And then attacking your anxieties with action is really what we're talking about in this whole assignment. But the last one, this idea of releasing your cares to God, is to be able to just go, and it's kind of the serenity prayer, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to do everything I can about the things that I have control over, but what I don't have control over, I'm going to turn it over. And I'm just going to say, here it is. I let go of this. And you say that enough times. I find breath prayers are really great. These are like prayers you can say in the space of one breath. Mm-hmm. If you take the 23rd Psalm, Lord, you're my shepherd. I'm not going to be afraid. Lord, you're my shepherd. I'm not going to be afraid. First 20 times you say it, you might not feel it. But by the 30th time, you begin to feel inside, oh, you know what? He is my shepherd. I don't have to be afraid. So I'd say those might be 4 steps for a homework assignment on fear.
Woohoo! Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. On that note, where can people go to find Unafraid and to find out more?
Yep. So they can find Unafraid at any bookstore. You can buy it virtually anywhere right now. Go online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you buy your books. You can find out more about it at adamhamilton.org. Mm-hmm. That is my blog site, adamhamilton.org. You can also, that's probably the best place to go. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter. And so I'm at Pastor Adam Hamilton on Facebook and Rev Adam Hamilton on Twitter. And I post various things about this from time to time as well. So I'm both a pastor and I'm reading this book. So some of the things I post are about just being a pastor, and some of them are about just life, and some of them are about being unafraid.
Love it, love it, love it. My wife, Jessica, she's the producer, always wants me to ask a question for parents and their kids.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think these ideas or these steps are really important for children as well. I've got a little granddaughter, and in fact, near the end of the book, I talk about Stella, and she's 4 and her fears, and exactly the idea that she is, when she wakes up in the middle of the night, she spends the night. In fact, she spends the night tonight. She spends the night about twice a month. And in the middle of the night, often she'll wake up with a nightmare, or it'll be thundering outside. Last time she was over and it was thundering. And she woke up and she's crying. And I went down, I picked her up, and I just held her as tight as I could. And as I held her, I just reminded her, Stella, Papa's here, and you're safe in my arms. Nothing bad's going to happen. And it's amazing. I reassured her several times later back down. She slept through the rest of the storm that night. She just needed to know that someone was nearby who was holding her. And that's part of what, teaching our children how to pray to at bedtime. It's helping them be able to know that not only are you safe with us, but reassuring them about the things that they might be afraid of. And I think each of those steps is important. I was thinking about the school shootings and how important it was for parents to reassure their children that schools are safe, and they are actually. If you look there, a child is more likely to be hurt in their parents' car driving somewhere than they are in a public school. If you look at the facts, despite the fact that we've got to do something about what's going on when it comes to the schools. So anyhow, I think these same steps work with children. They are the classic things that human beings have done for as long as we've been around to live unafraid with courage and hope.
Woohoo! Thank you. What personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Yeah. Well, one of those is being with my granddaughter. So I love my kids, but I had no idea how cool it would be to be a grandfather. It's like a do-over when you're older and wiser and you have more time and money. And so it's been, when our kids were small, we were broke and I was stressed out and I was working so many hours. I just didn't get to do all the things I wanted to with them. And now I feel like I have a chance to do that over again. So, that, blue skies, I ride a tractor, and I have an old John Deere tractor that I love to get on at 30/20, and we've got a little acreage, and I love to do that. I love to be with my wife, and all those things. And I love my job. I love caring for people here at the church, and I really savor helping people grow in their faith and helping them be unafraid.
Woohoo! Awesome. Any last words you want to share with us, Adam, and then maybe time for a very, very short guided prayer?
Yeah, sure. I would just say the main point I want people to take away is that you don't have to live in fear. That fear is a normal part of life. If you're fearful, that's normal. It's okay. But you're not meant to be incapacitated by your fears. Some fear is good. It's really a gift. It saves you when there's something really dangerous there. But the rest of the time, you're not meant to be paralyzed by your fears. There are strategies to help you to live unafraid. And when you can face your fears and you press through them, you find on the other side a lot of joy. And a lot of the best parts of life are when you press through your fear and you come out the other side. So I just want to encourage people to be hopeful today that if they are fearful, they're struggling with fear, anxiety, or worry, that they can make it through this. They will make it through this. And that there's some concrete things they can do to help them to live unafraid. So why don't we pray? And here's what I do. I just invite people to put their hands on their lap like they're just offering themselves to God, or they're opening themselves up. And I just invite your listeners, just whisper this prayer quietly under your breath. Just whisper it. God, thank you for everything. Thank you for life and love and people. Thank you for the sky that's blue and for the rain that falls, for the air that I breathe. Help me to be unafraid, to trust that you're with me all the time. Help me have a bias of hope, to examine the things I'm fearful of and to find the truth about them. Help me to take action when I'm afraid, and help me release my cares to you. I entrust my life to you. I trust that you're with me all the time. And I offer myself to you again in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Woohoo!
Michael, thank you so much for having me on your program. It was a joy.
Thank you so much, Adam. It has been a true honor and a treat, and so, so beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get unafraid, and begin discovering your own courage today, and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so, so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, Adam.
I love the fact that you had all these great questions. You really had read the book, and it was fun to, to have you raise those stories up. Like, you're the first person. Several of the folks I've interviewed with have read the book, but you're the first person who really had a grasp of all of those things and was able to ask me them, and it just made it a lot of fun to be on your program. So thank you. And I can tell your energy level. People must really enjoy the way you approach what you're doing.
It's. I was given a second chance. This is what lights me up, and I want to. How do I put it? Life's too short to go through asleep, afraid, without their light shining bright. And I want to do everything I can for them.
Well, you've walked through that. I mean, you've lived through the other side, through one side of that where, from what I've read of your story, you not only lived through that, but you are now taking that and doing something profound with it and beautiful in it.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!